We're good. This is from Jericho. We got a couple of slides here from Jericho. This one and this aerial view of Neolithic Jericho. And it kind of occurred to me that one thing that I didn't really address last time was Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic. And you guys know what those terms mean?
I'm assuming those are time periods, like something was found, and there's a track that dated back to Neolithic. It's probably a certain time area.
Yes, that's exactly right. And when we talk about these terms, and you'll find this a lot in archaeology and in art history, is we put together terms with prefixes and suffixes, and we kind of build our own language. A lot of this is right out of Latin, by the way. And lithic means stone.
Paleo, old stone.
And paleo is old. Meso is middle, kind of like at the ball game. Get the seats in between the good seats and the nosebleed. That's called the visiting. Meso, middle. You know, we talk, like I said, we put together words often with these prefixes and suffixes. A lot of people call Central America countries of Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua as Mesoamerica, in the middle. Anyway, and then Neo means new. And so Paleolithic, Old Stone Age, Mesolithic, New Stone Age, Middle Stone Age, and Neolithic, New Stone Age. And that's aerial view Neolithic, 8,000, 7,000 BC. What will replace the Stone Age is the Iron Age and the Bronze Age, when people around the world began to, well, they figure out that you can take certain ores, metals out of the earth, melt them down, and make stuff with them. And so anyway, this is from Jericho. This has some numbers on it on the side too, as I was talking about. And it just really denotes that it was found sometime earlier. We don't do that anymore, but it's a human skull with restored features, and it's basically plaster and painted, and they put shells, seashells, in for the eyes, and part of this has broken off. Well, it does tell us something here, 7,200, 6,700 BCE. So it's maybe as old as 9,200 years old. Yes.
Isn't Jericho the oldest city in the world?
Oh, yes. It's the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. And we that's one of the things that happens in the new Stone Age, in the Neolithic period, is that we find places like this. This is Neolithic Jericho, and it is the oldest that we know of continuously inhabited city. And so what we find in the Neolithic period is this, that they're actually building cities. They're communal. And if you're building cities, two things, probably It's stable and it's permanent. Yes,
Oh, I was about to say, probably also pretty close to water, but
yes, that's another thing too. Absolutely. Close to water. That's the primary resource above all else. And it'll be by naturally flowing water, preferably a river, because the river stays clean. It just keeps getting a supply, presumably, of fresh water, which could be snow-capped mountains melting, could be springs, it could be lakes, it could be a lot of things, but by water. That's the first and most important resource. And because if you're by water, what do you have? You have the ability for irrigation and growing crops, which is the second consideration most important on your list. Absolutely. And so we'll see almost with every major civilization, beginning with this and through the next few chapters, will be by fresh water. And we'll see that they learn how to irrigate. In the Neolithic period, a few thousand years BCE. But Jericho is all that. And it's permanent, it's there, and it's so permanent, it's still here today. And this is 8,000 BCE, so we're thinking this city is could be as old as 10,000 years old. And so something else we can divine from this. Human features, putting the features back on a skull. We don't really for sure know why that is, but we know how that practice has persisted in cultures and through the ages. And so we were talking about this, talking about with somebody just the other day about until recent times in the West, in the United States of America, and still in many places around the world, when a person dies and that person is an important person, they create a death mask so that their face is preserved in perpetuity. And that was even as recently as 100 years ago or so in the United States. Doing death masks was the practice. And so this is something akin to that, and it is an idea that still persists today, and that is ancestor worship or veneration of your ancestors. And we do that still today in a big way. And so we're starting to see some of these characteristics of modern civilization starting to emerge out of what I was talking about, nomadic peoples, hunter-gatherers, people that at least maybe if they didn't live in the caves were central to their life. And so wanted to kind of put some of this out there too. This all goes on. And this is from Jordan. And where we're talking about here, Jericho, is and Gazal, Jordan, and all of that. That's really right where we have modern day Jordan, Palestine, Israel, that part of the Middle East, which is really much closer to the Mediterranean than some of the places we'll look at. And so anyway, plaster painted and inlaid with bitumen, which is this, the eyes. So we see they were making art too. And Atahoyuk from Turkey, 6000 BCE. But see, this is a restored view because this was not continuously inhabited. But Jericho was not the only place. It's the place that there has always been somebody living. And I think I was talking the other day about historical records, and the Bible is referred to, is used, it's used for worship and a basis for religion and so on, but it's also looked at as part of an historical record. And so we know about the walls of Jericho. This is all cataloged in the Bible. And so, that being said, couple of other remnants of civilization. Ireland, this is much newer, but still ancient. We start to see that they're developing architecture. That's what you're going to build cities, have permanent places to live. Architecture's big. We have some other places. This is in Malta. We start to see this. The oldest is in the Middle East, but we're starting to see it around Europe, Northern Europe, Southern Europe, places in the Mediterranean. And this is the primary architectural device. It's called post and lintel. These two are the post. The top part is the lintel. We still use this today. It's very simple. It's very basic. It's very efficient too. You have two columns holding up across piece. And so we still do that. That's a lot of that's right underneath this door. We have studs. And gee, I'm trying to remember the name of that. There is a certain name for when it's over the door, but bottom line, it's post and lintel architecture. We still use it. And probably the most famous from Neolithic times is this in England, Stonehenge. And we're still trying to figure this out. There is ongoing research on Stonehenge, and partly a lot of research needs to be done because we're not finding anything of a written record of what this was all about. And every time we find out more, it becomes much more mysterious, oddly enough. We know a few things about it. We know that the spaces in between the posts.
Stonehenge, it says like something with, is it the sun or with?
It's a calendar, yes. Yeah, it marks the movement of celestial bodies.
Yeah, I think it's angled towards, is it called summer solstice or something?
Summer solstice, yeah.
That's what it's angled towards. My mom actually used to do a lot of like stuff in her free time about it, and then it's supposed to. I think people assume it served as like a healing ground because it's not really anywhere where like around civilization. So people would nomads would seek out the site and like the angling towards the summer solstice and like all this other stuff kind of points towards the fact that it might have been used as a spiritual healing ground.
Yes. There's there's a lot of evidence they're finding on the grounds to suggest that it was a religious healing place. And your summer solstice and winter solstice, this is like so huge. You guys know when the summer solstice is? Anybody? Yes.
Wait, is it July 21st?
June 25th. Yeah, good. And the winter solstice is
December 22nd.
yes. And it kind of varies a little bit because our calendar is not exactly accurate, because that's why we have leap year and stuff. Because the earth does not revolve around the sun in 365 days even. It's 365 days, 6 hours, something. Yeah, all that's true. And when in the summer solstice, the sun is at its northernmost point in the sky, partly because the tilt of the earth, the axis of the earth, gives us a higher arc. The sun goes way high in the sky and it goes down. And incidentally, summer solstice is the longest day of the year. And it marks the middle, it marks the beginning of this, what we call summer. But in terms of celestial stuff, it's really the middle of the year. And the opposite is true when we talk about the winter solstice. Sun stays in the southern sky and it doesn't get very high. And the days are short. And so what does this have to do with anything? We were talking about agriculture just a few minutes ago when we were talking about water sources in Jericho. You got to know when you need to plant your crops, because along with being permanent and stable, not nomadic, you have to employ agriculture, take care of your own food. Xander gets it.
Oh, no.
Probably does, but I'm good. Bottom line, this is hugely important development to understand that seasons are not random, that you can actually control your plants, your crops, your food source. And so all of that is important. And I have here some hot links. And so this is from Bing News, and let me see where my screen share is. Okay. This is from August 14th. So what are we talking about? 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks and 2 days. This is from the magazine Business Insider. I want to make a point about that is that you don't really need to go, you can, further exploration, go to the journals and all the academic sources to find out what's going on in archaeology. It actually shows up in a lot of places like The Guardian, like USA Today or the New York Times or National Geographic and so on. And so archaeologists figured out why Stonehenge sandstone boulders have lasted for millennia. And new study offers insight into why Stonehenge had remained unchanged since it was built 5,000 years ago, and they figured out that they contain interlocking quartz crystals. These crystals are really old, but bottom line, this is a recent discovery. And it says here, a new study reveals sometimes you'll find a little history of the research. In 1958, a team was repairing a cracked chunk of sandstone, and he took it from Stonehenge, and he brought it to his home in Florida in the US, but after 60 years, repatriated it to historic England. See, that's another thing. We don't do that so much anymore, but 60 years ago, a lot of people would just, you found it was yours. So there is a movement in the world right now to repatriate art. All kinds of art, put it back, give it back to the people where it came from. And so that was kind of the nice thing, but they gave an opportunity to do a sample, and they looked at it with x-rays, microscope, CT scanned it. As I was saying, archaeologists use all of the tools of modern technology in their research. And so that's what it looks like. And the serins are composed of sediment deposit during the, what did I say, Mesozoic? That's the middle age. Zoic is animal life. So Paleozoic is the early forms of life. Mesozoic is the life forms that came after that. And zoic is the same root word as zoo, like St. Louis. And so anyway, that's one that I had. Come on, you guys. Finding out how to navigate this. Prehistoric cave art. Hey, this is one. I don't really have to get into all of this. I thought this was a really interesting story too, especially since we just came off of talking about ancient cave art and the oldest stuff. Well, what they're finding is that much of the art that we consider to be the oldest really isn't the oldest. And so today, the artistic methods of prove art have, okay. Bimbeka, Yakari, Chetan Cupules. The oldest piece in the world, oldest piece of art in the world has been identified as the first piece of, I'm tripping on my, anyway, it was two pieces unearthed in caves in India, dated to be around 700,000 BC. And that's the old way in the textbook, BCE. But they think there are many more of these objects to be found. A lot of pieces in the Middle East. The ram was discovered in the Golan Heights, and experts believe that it was man-made, suggests that it could have been made by Homo erectus. So we're going to find a lot of that kind of stuff that predates modern humans. We got some pieces that go to Neanderthal times. And so this art may predate the modern Homo sapiens that we are. And so sub-Saharan Africa, eggshell engravings from South Africa. We saw a little bit of that here in the book. And so you can take any of those and kind of figure out let me make sure I still got my screen share. Yep, we're good. And so anyway, this piece right here, this is a book review. African Sculpture and Imperial French Invention. This is a really good book. I only went through part of it and read the abstract. But bottom line, what that is, it's kind of deconstructing ancient art and so-called primitive art and saying that it's not particularly primitive, although it's old. And this idea of fetish, that's what you'll find in a lot of sources, old sources, when they are talking about art made by ancient people. We don't understand what its purpose was, so we call it a fetish art, fetish piece, fetish sculpture. And so anyway, that being that, and let's see. Oh no, see, I'm trying to do more than I know how to do. Okay. My apologies here, guys. Text it out, just say it. And my apologies for the break in the action. This basically is this. When you got Zoom going, you got this other stuff going, it gets very finicky. And so we're going to move on to. Okay, we're on the right screen. All right. So we're talking about Jericho and some of these places in the Middle East. We're kind of going to go right to basically ancient Mesopotamia and Persia, which is modern day Iraq and Iran. And here it is on the map, Mesopotamia. We're talking about the word meso, middle, the middle area between two major rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. And as Xander pointed out, you need water. And so we have these two major rivers. And I want to point out a couple of other things too. And that is that we have on this map Assyria, we have Akkad, we have Sumer, and what we have are basically city-states. There's Babylon right there. And so what we have here, and before I go through this, I want to talk about the timeline. Because up here, or over here, in Sumer, we have Sumerian culture. And it's 3,500 to 32 BCE. But then we have Neo-Sumerian and Babylonian culture, which you see Sumer and Babylon being basically both on the Euphrates River. And that's 2150 to 1600 BC. And Assyrian culture is more up here in the north. And it's 900 to 539 BCE. So that's on the timeline. It's at the end of the chapter. But I just wanted to let you know that this is more or less the same area of the world, but the cultures dominate. And as we were talking about Jericho a moment ago, that it was a city, what we'll have for a pretty long time here, a couple of thousand years, is what we call the city-state. And so the state doesn't really exist in its modern sense. It's a city and it has a surrounding area, which is usually used for agriculture, livestock, farming, sometimes for rock quarries outside the city, stuff like that. It's basically the support area.
Like in ancient Greece where you had Sparta, you had Athens, and
Yes,
different cities.
precisely. And those were city-states. Yeah. Xander.
Also, like an example, I was born in Tunisia, like right next, pretty close to Carthage, and my family owned two pretty big marble quarries, and those been there for I don't know how long.
Thousands of years, yeah. And it's right outside of Carthage, you said.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, if you're gonna build a permanent settlement, you're probably gonna do stone, and quarries are their home. And Carthage, another city-state. Rome itself was a city-state, turned into an empire, but it was a city-state. And so we have a number of these that are in Mesopotamia. And it is what we would call the late Stone Age. We're not seeing much in the way of metals yet. Everything is mostly made out of stone, but we got to start with this. Almost every text will start with the Wonka vase. And part of that has to do with, first of all, it's pretty old, 5,300 years old, and it's in the Iona Temple complex, Uruk, and so that is right here. Iraq. Yes.
Is it really still that condition? Like,
Yes. Yes. As a matter of fact, this is in the National Museum in Baghdad. It is in this condition. Pretty amazing. And you know what's so important about this particular vase is this. It's kind of our oldest example of this style of storytelling. I wanted to point out before anything, it's made of alabaster. Anybody ever use alabaster? It's a real soft rock. It's probably even softer than limestone. And back in my day, that was the stone that you would use in sculpture one, beginning sculpture class, because you could carve on it, you could chisel it and stuff. It wasn't too difficult, but it was pretty strong too. And so anyway, this is the oldest example of this kind of storytelling. And so the Wonka vase has what we call 3 different friezes. That's each of these bands or registers. We call that. And anybody remember what we were talking about this kind of sculpture that's just on the surface? Relief sculpture, bas relief, low relief. And so anyway, that's what this is. These friezes are done in bas relief, and none of that itself is particularly new and novel, except that this tells a story. And it tells a story much in the same way like a graphic novel would tell a story. And so we have all of the prosperity here. On the top, we have the workers bringing in the harvest. You see vats, probably of wine, baskets full of fruits and vegetables and stuff. And on the bottom, we have what we think is basically animals, probably livestock. And so this is a story about their civilization. And there is in some ways a hierarchy that the most important things are on top, and typically they're bigger. And so this kind of storytelling will persist for millennia. We will see this is not that radically different than what the Egyptians painted on their walls and carved into their stone. It's a way of telling a story visually. And so the Wonka vase is really the oldest example of those things that we call pictorial conventions, that you know that the important things are on top, that you read this, you go all the way around, then you go here, and then you go all the way around. That's a convention. And so if you could read this, you could make sense out of Egyptian stuff, which will come thousands of years later, or at least a couple of thousand years later. And so it's in the National Museum of Baghdad. And here is the White Temple, where it came from. And this is this kind of temple. Well, this is in pretty poor shape. We got some other examples from Mesopotamia that are in much better shape than this. And so this is what we think that temple looked like. And you can see that there was this, basically a temple on top. The highest place was where the temple would stand. And this would be the place where the marca base had come from. And this is the goddess, female head, Inanna, from the temple complex. And so you can see they have, what would you call this? A pretty good handle on realism or naturalism. You could almost imagine who this person was. And so the symbolism is kind of on the low side here. We'll see some of this change through the years in Mesopotamia. And here are statuettes of two worshippers from the square temple at Ishnu, excuse me. And it's a little newer. And so this is moving a little bit more towards symbolism. Yes.
I was about to say, because it looks like, if I look at it, I'd have to analyze it, I'd say their eyes are pretty wide open because they're waiting for like a deity to appear. And they look, their hands look like they're sucked into prayer. So
Yes.
I heard a lot of cultures used to, because their gods used to be really, really important to them. So them not praying 24/7 or constantly was something they really worried about, which is why they created these statues.
So that people knew how to pray. Absolutely. Yes, all of that. You guys hear all that? It's all true. It's spot on. Yeah, that's the eyes. Yeah, they are in some ways symbolic, because as Ender said, it's really about seeing more than other people see. The worshipers see more than ordinary people, and they know how to pray. And this is all, that's what the votive part or the worship part is. They call these votive statues, by the way. And the wide eyes, the big eyes, that's a convention of Mesopotamian art that will persist through all of those various cultures. And if you want to use a modern term, if I'm wrong about this, step in. They're woke. You know, being, I see it. I see more. Everybody else kind of running around. They don't see it. We see God. We are open. And so, yeah, it's about awareness. It's about a lot of things. Anyway, seated statuette, again, the eyes. The eyes as, yes.
On the last one, the hands look like really small, especially when they're camera. On this one has hands. Is there a reason that their hands are not there?
Well, I think, but I'm not really sure that anybody's settled that question. I've not run into that. Except that usually it's like the things that are most important get the scale. So hands, in a lot of ways, are just probably not as important. And as you say, this one is just simply, these have been broken off. This is a damaged statue. And we don't know what those hands, they could have been small like this. But again, this is that combination of symbolism and naturalism. And so parts of this are kind of naturalistic. A lot of it is symbolic. So symbolic art, that's kind of a thing to keep in mind. I want to point out something else too, and this happens all through Mesopotamia. The beard that has been stylized, and that is kind of a mark of status that actually these worshipers, if they were worshipers in the temple, they were probably pretty high up in the society, but this was very much a feature of Mesopotamian art, that you see the beard that has been woven or stylized or somehow taken care of is what they did. And so another thing that we found there, this one I got to point out too, British Museum, London, talking about repatriating things, colonization. This colonization by European countries, a lot of times they took a lot of stuff and shipped it back home. But this is a bull-headed harp with inlaid sound box. This is 4,500 years old. And look at this. This is like, and this is gold too. I mean, you know, it kind of shows you by this time, the level of sophistication, the level of technology they had any idea that they played music. And you can see up here, they have sticks on the strings, and you can tighten or loosen them, just like you have keys on your guitar, on the end of your guitar. Tighter, higher note, more slack, lower. And so they played music, and this inlay here is just magnificent. Lapis lazuli, that is a blue stone. And it's what you would call a semi-precious stone. It's kind of rare, and it's really very beautiful, and it's blue. And so here's what the front of that box looks like with the inlay. And they use shell. And we're starting to see these kinds of things happen too. This comes out of Mesopotamia. Horses, or bulls rather, with human heads. Animals acting like people. And in this case, animal playing the harp. And this other kind of what could be maybe a scorpion. These part animal, part human beings. This will persist for a long time. They persist through Egypt. They persist through ancient Greece. And they still exist today, just pretty much only as mythology. But I gotta add this, those of you who like graphic novels, these guys that make this stuff, especially like the great Stan Lee, they talk about this. They said, we looked at these ancient cultures when we were making our superheroes. And our superheroes have superpowers. Sometimes they have powers that come from animals. Sometimes they are more than that. But bottom line is that it still exists in this culture. Of course, this was probably a little bit more mainstream and more to their religion. Bottom line, though, and this is University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. And this is a cylinder seal, which is a round device that has a negative low relief, and basically you put its modern impression, that's wax. And a seal would be wax where you roll this cylinder over the top of it and create the impression. And it was basically used for written communication, and especially if you wanted to, it's like kind of like putting a lock on your writing. Roll it up and then you put the sealing wax on it. Or it could just denote that it is an official document. We still do that. So, and it's not all electronic today, but you get something notarized, and they'll seal it, they'll make an impression on the document, they sign their name. Well, this was the same kind of authentication, except it was 4,500 years ago. And so we're finding these things. And as I say, this has to be a reverse. How many of you are printmakers, by the way? Teaching it so much. Printmaking, always have a reverse and to get positive images. This, one of the great objects from Mesopotamia, the standard of Ur. And see, we're getting close, closer, 4,500 years ago. Lapis lazuli, shell, red limestone, bottom line, bituminous shell. War side, the standard of Ur, bottom line, a standard. Before it was amicable, standard. Before it was repeated. Yes. Standard is a marker that says who you are. And in battle, it's important to know whose flag you're under so that the right people are fighting each other. You stay on your side of the lines with the American flag. You got the other guy's flag over there. The flag is the standard. And at least originally when they discovered this thing, they thought it was something of a standard that would be put up on a pole, and you'd lead your troops into battle. And this would be more or less the flag, the standard. But we're not so sure about that anymore, but the name persists. What it does give us is a pretty good idea of Mesopotamian civilization. And so this is the war side, and it has three registers or 3 freezes, if you will. Again, we saw that from the Warnka base. How do you read this? Well, from top to bottom and typically from left to right, but some are put together differently. The war side depicts this side in battle. We got a chariot, we got its horses, we got soldiers with spears. This guy is taller. So he is the important person. He's either the king or the general. Whoever leads the armies into war, that is him. And so what we have here on the bottom part is this side's soldiers, the other guy's soldiers. Which side do you think won? This side or that side? They still have all their weapons. They still have their uniforms and helmets and everything. These guys, they don't got much left. They're kind of lost their uniforms, their weapons. They're kind of embarrassed. They're, yeah, victory. And so, and the bottom freeze, we see that this rolls over the vanquished. We see a dead body here, another one here. This is a dead body. We're moving on through. We have conquered our enemy. And so this is the war side. And this is the other side of this object. And it's not that big, if you will. It's only 7 and 7/8 inches high and 1 foot 6 inches, 18 inches, 18.5 inches across. It's always important to take a look at this information because the way it looks on this slide, it could be huge, but it's a small object. This is the peace side, and it basically shows life during peacetime. And what you have here, would you guess? A little taller than all the rest, the leader. And what you have here are all people, probably the important people, the senators, the royalty, the leadership, and they're drinking wine and stuff. And back here, we've got a harp player, got music. We got this guy here is probably the attendant for the leader. So you can kind of see what's going on. It's not that radically different, even though this thing is 4.5 millennia old. The centerpiece, it has all of the kinds of activities that people would do, livestock.
It almost looks like it's like social classes as well.
It does, absolutely.
At the bottom, like they don't have a whole lot of livestock and they're carrying most of the stuff.
Yeah, these guys, absolutely. Yeah, these guys would be the people that own the livestock and stuff, and these would be the farm workers. Good catch. Absolutely. Yeah, they're all doing work of some sort. They're carrying the bags of grain and so on. And it is social class. And again, conventions. Most important on top. And I think that to some extent, I could not really verify this, but a lot of things that happen in visual arts actually matches how we talk and how we describe the language that we use. And so I don't know which came first. I don't know if we'll ever know. But you would talk about this in terms of people in high places, right? And then they would talk about the lowly workers. Well, that's exactly how that is on this standard. So there are so many things that kind of fit quite nicely with language that we use today. And so low relief, battle scenes, fragment of the victory stela. A stela is a stone, a commemorative stone. That's what that word means. And we still use stelas today quite frequently. A tombstone is a stela. Here lies grandma, grandpa, whoever. And so, yeah, this was a common practice then, is that they would create stelas to mark victory, a great victory. That was kind of some part of the thing. Head of an Akkadian ruler. We see the eyes have been damaged here. This is a very good example of that Mesopotamian beard I was talking about. We won't see that so much outside Mesopotamia. When we start to look at Egyptian art, they had different conventions. One of the most common was a rolled beard that looked like a cylinder that comes down from the chin. But in Mesopotamia, well braided, well kept beards. And we could see that the likelihood of large eyes, that was probably part of this before it was damaged. Victory stela, again, highest, the vanquished. Here's his army. There's the praying to the thanks to the sun. Thank you, great ruler. And so on. And so the temple at Orca showed you earlier. This is a ziggurat looking southwest in Iraq, begun 4,000 years ago. So this predates the Egyptian pyramids. And this is in much better shape. And what you have are these massive stairwells or stairways, and up on top would have been the temple. And again, that's another thing. The temple will be the highest place because it's the most important place. And so another amazing feat. And what we find here in Sumerian culture is this. We see in Mesopotamia the advent of written language. And that's what's going on here. It's called cuneiform language. And it is writing. And we know how to interpret this today. We know what this stuff says. And that's like an extremely important development because, as I was saying earlier, prehistory, and you see cuneiform, we start to see that around 2000 BC. Here. Perfect. This is the stela with the laws of Hammurabi. And it has a really nice write-up in the textbook about this. And Hammurabi was a great Babylonian king. And this is, they call it the Code of Hammurabi or Hammurabi's laws. But it tells you all kinds of things on how to live and what was legal. This is almost like the law of the land.
Wasn't,
Yes,
that like first like written laws in history?
yes, yeah. And as far as we know, at least right now, that is exactly right. This is where, this is, everybody that studies jurisprudence, they study law, can trace that back here. Usually we talk about English law as the basis for American law, but there's a lot of things. It's still the Ten Commandments are laws, et cetera. And so among the laws in the Code of Hammurabi, it talks about having, if you have incest with your daughter, you will be killed. It's death penalty. If you, and this is the age where they had dowries that would accompany, where that you pay a dowry for a woman to get, the man would pay a dowry to marry a woman. But if the woman did not bear a son, the guy could get his money back. It's just crazy stuff like today. But some of this stuff actually persists. The idea of an eye for an eye is out of the Code of Hammurabi. Stuff like that, but it covers a wide range of social issues and a lot of concerns. And so, the stela with the laws of Hammurabi. And this is kind of an interesting little piece of this stela too. And that is the king here has goat's horns or some kind of horns on his hat, on his crown, but you only see 4 of them, and it should have had 8 because they're starting to kind of consider that you don't have to do everything full frontal view. And so you could do kind of a mix. This is, you can see both arms and everything, but you don't see both sides of the face, you know. So the conventions are changing a little bit. Art historians find those kinds of things very significant. The Lion Gate, modern Turkey, and we'll see we're getting closer. 1400 BCE, 4000 BCE, beaker with animal decoration from Iran, I think 6,000 years old, and it's ceramics. And so one of the main sources of artwork, one of the principal mediums that we'll be looking at is ceramic art. And it tells us something about the technology, tells us something about how they live. Actually, scientists with their tools today, archaeologists, they can analyze the inside of this vessel and find out what kind of food or whatever it was it contained. So, and it's time. So, any questions? Questions? I got a question. Coming back on Wednesday? Okay, well, I'll see you then.
good luck.
You too.